But the richest real estate in the world are cemeteries because they're areas rich in books never written, relationships never pursued, businesses never started. When it's your turn to be buried, when it's your turn to be in the cemetery, don't have those regrets.
Welcome to Lessons in Leverage, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of success. We'll help you unlock the secrets of leverage so you can amplify your impact in the world. Here is your host, Spencer Lowe.
Welcome back to another episode of Lessons in Leverage. I'm your host, Spencer Lowe. But before I give you the introduction for today's guest, I want to read you an excerpt that he wrote. Quote, "In 2012, I was diagnosed with a rare form of melanoma and told I'd be dead in 2 years. I was given a death sentence and thought, how could I turn it into a life sentence? I spent 5 years on a drug that gave me terrible flu-like symptoms every week, had my foot amputated in 2018, and my leg amputated in the middle of COVID in 2020. I'm currently treated every 3 weeks for the tumors I have in my lungs. Through this 12-plus year journey, I've learned several things, but the two most important things I've learned are that you don't truly know yourself until you've been tested by some form of adversity, and that cancer has made me a better person. It's helped me focus on what is important in life." End quote. As we head into the new year, it's the perfect time to reflect on how we can live with greater purpose and resilience. And that is why today I'm excited to welcome our guest, Terry Tucker, who has transformed his 13-year cancer journey and a diverse career in athletics, law enforcement, and business into a mission that is going out and inspiring and uplifting others. So with that being said, Terry, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, Spencer, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
You know, when you hear about these diagnoses that are like, you know, you have this many days or years or weeks or months, they've done these studies about how it's crazy that what the doctors give as a timeline is often a very exact prediction for people, that their brain, that they adapt to that prediction, it becomes, like you said, it can be a death sentence and it can be a prophecy that then they live to, and that really ends their life. And so one of my questions for you is, here we are 12 years after that 2-year sentence. How in that moment did you confront that? Because you have to have so much mental strength to not just say, well, that's it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, I know I went through all the stages initially that we would associate with grief. You know, first it was, I can't possibly have cancer. It's denial. I've done everything right in my life. And then it's anger. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And our daughter was in high school when I was diagnosed. So then there was a sort of bargaining with God. You know, hey, just let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I absolutely got to a point where I was down. I was depressed. I felt sorry for myself. And then I came out the other end and it was, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. You know, I do not like the cards that I've been dealt, but I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability. And that's really what I've been trying to do. And I always kind of looked at doctors kind of like Vegas. You know, with this kind of situation, they're sort of handicapping you based on your age, your level of health, and basically the stage of the cancer that you have. Oh, you're going to live 2 years. Oh, you're going to live 5 years. But what doctors don't know and what they can't take into account, and it's kind of the intangibles, are you want to see your daughter graduate from high school. You want to see your daughter graduate from college. You want to walk her down the aisle. You want to play with your grandkids. And that purpose of having something out there to live for, at least for me, sustained me and kept me going. But just like you said, I know people who the doctor said, you know what, 2 years from now, you'll be dead. And literally on the anniversary of that 2 years, boom, they're dead. I've always wanted my life to be based on the decisions that I made, not on the ones that I didn't make or that somebody else made for me. So yeah, I mean, I've certainly done a lot of Western traditional kind of medicine, but I'll just give you an example. I've also done some other kind of things. One of the tests that my doctor used to use to determine the progression of my disease was called a PET scan. And PET's an acronym. Don't ask me what it stands for because I couldn't tell you. I probably couldn't even pronounce the words. But it basically involves injecting you with radioactive sugar, with the idea being that cancer cells have a higher metabolism than the other cells. And so they pick up that radioactive sugar at a higher rate, and that's what glows on a scan. Well, nobody ever said, hey, Terry, maybe you shouldn't eat as much sugar as you're eating. I just figured, well, yeah, maybe I ought to try to do as much keto as I possibly could. Now, don't get me wrong. Do I have a pizza from time to time and stuff like that? I sure do. But I really try to focus on proteins, fruits, and vegetables and spend my time doing that. So the other part of it is you've got to educate yourself. I mean, I want to be involved in my own healthcare. I don't want some doctor, with a bunch of initials after the name saying, Terry, we're going to do this. I want you to say that, but then I want you to tell me why. And if it makes sense to me, then we're going to do it. If it doesn't make sense to me, it's not something I really want to pursue.
That makes complete sense to me. I think that's the right way to think about it. And I think that mental fortitude and that level of ownership and responsibility to say, I'm going to be in charge. Certainly I'm going to listen to experts and get their feedback and listen to what they have to say and try different treatments that I think make sense. But ultimately, yeah, you got to educate yourself. And the belief, the fact that when I think about everything you just shared, the things that stick out to me is, one, if you didn't have that clear vision for your future beyond the supposed death date, then it'd be so easy to let your mentality slip. So you have to know what you're looking forward to, what you're driving towards, having that clear goal and purpose. And I know you've done a lot of work on this. How does someone figure out that purpose? How do they get to that vision of having enough meaning to then push through these kind of difficulties?
Yeah, you kind of use the word that I use a lot. You have to find meaning in your misery. There's got to be, and there is a reason. There's a reason you're going through this. I don't believe at all that this is just happenstance. But if you kind of look at back in 2019, I had all 88 genes tested that doctors either know of or suspect cause every form of cancer that we know, not just the weird melanoma that I've got, but every form of cancer. And I have absolutely no mutations in any of my genes that would predispose me to any form of cancer. And yet I have this incredibly rare form, which certainly begs the question, why or how did I get it? Nobody's ever been able to answer that question, why I got this certain form of cancer. I've got it. So now I've got to live with it. I've got to find, why do I have this and what am I supposed to do with it? Spencer, I have a very strong faith in God that this is something that's bigger than me. And the way I've come to understand this is that God is using my infirmity, my disease, to show his power, grace, love, mercy, healing through this event. And so whenever God wants to take me, go ahead and take me. I mean, when I had my foot amputated, or my leg amputated, found out these tumors in my lungs that I'm still being treated for, my oncologist showed me my CAT scan. Now, I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan, but you could kind of look at it and be like, oh, that doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces of my lungs. Without to be too graphic, I was coughing up this green bloody phlegm. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive? And Spencer, I will never forget this till the day I die. He put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been. Which said to me, God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend nearly as much time worrying about the dying. Spend much more time focused on the living and what my purpose for this is all about.
That's such a powerful concept, because what we focus on becomes our whole experience. And the ability to then focus on living is where all the value is. I mean, I think of people who live a long life, but constantly focus on what they don't have and miss out on a bunch of it. I mean, how easy is it right now to focus on your phone and miss your kids right in front of you? Focus on the opportunity you didn't get and miss the one that's sitting right in front of you. I think it's a common pattern that we have as humans. And if we're not careful about what we focus on, I mean, we can end up missing all of the things that make life so good and meaningful. And so I love that story. Now I want to go back a bit because I do want to hear a little bit more of the full story. I wanted to start with some of these core elements of giving the audience a little bit of background about you, because this is truly an incredible story that I wanted them to understand, and certainly cancer really touches us all. And so I think it's an important place to start. But now I'd like to go back to the pre-cancer days and hear a little bit about your background. You've gone and you've done so many things. And I think I'm curious if in retrospect you see ways that maybe that prepared you for this, in terms of this idea of there being a higher purpose, whether that's the universe or God or whatever people believe. I mean, if it's not an accident, I think that it's magical to go back and see, how did you develop the strength, the mental resilience, the focus that then, when we got to this life-changing event, allowed you to choose the path of living 12 years, 10 years already past your supposed timeline, and continuing to not just live, but get a lot of value out of it, and give so much to the world in terms of sharing your story and inspiring others.
Yeah, I think I have to, I'm not going to go back to in utero, but I'm going to come pretty close to it. I really have to give that credit to my parents. I mean, my mom and dad, I have two brothers. We were all college athletes. One of my brothers was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. But my parents taught us the value of family, of loving each other, of caring for each other, of supporting each other. And all our lives revolved around sports. I mean, it was, I'd have a game Thursday night at 5:00 at this location, and my brother would have a practice at 5:00 on Thursday night at another location. So dad's going with me, mom's going with my brother, and things like that. So our whole lives revolved around sports. And it was really interesting. My parents were not overt about talking to us about service, about caring, about giving back, but they, I think, modeled what that meant. And again, kind of what you just said, without even realizing it, you sort of fast forward to my brothers and I and what we're doing now. I've had a lot of jobs in my life, but if you ask me what I did, I would probably say I was a police officer. And both of my brothers have been in education their entire lives. My one brother's the president of a Catholic high school that we graduated from in Chicago. The other one's a basketball coach and guidance counselor on the north side of Chicago. So without even realizing it, I think we sort of modeled what our parents did: give back, serve, and then have now passed that on to our children. My wife and I have a daughter in the military, and my brother's kids are, they're all in education and things like that. So there's a lot of sort of, they did it, we did it, now we're passing it on to our kids. And it's sort of a, the small snowball that starts at the top of the hill. And as you roll it down, it gets bigger and bigger and gets more momentum and things like that. So it really was, I think, our parents that taught us what was important in life. And it wasn't, my dad was, we were middle class. We never wanted for anything. We always had plenty of food on the table and things like that. But it was never about, I got to make more money, or I've got to exercise these stock options, or whatever it ended up being. It was family. Family was always first after our faith. And I always talk about my 3 F's, which are faith, family, and friends, the most important things, and in that order for me, that really kind of keep my life going.
That's incredible. And so as you came up, you went through sports, you played basketball at a high level in college, then went into police work, did some hostage negotiation for the SWAT team, lots of different unique experiences. Where were you when, how did that then lead up to the cancer diagnosis? Where, timeline wise, where did that fit in?
That was much farther down the road. And I mean, you're right. You kind of look at my resume, it sort of looks like a Super Bowl went off in a room. I mean, it's just literally kind of all over the place. And there is a backstory. And if you understand the backstory, my sort of progression throughout life makes sense. My dad's dad, my paternal grandfather, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories growing up that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to live. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to live. So when I graduated from college, my father and my grandmother, who was living with us at the time, were both dying of different forms of cancer. So I had a choice. I could have said, hey, Dad, no, you're dying. Sorry about that. I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to go blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So my first 2 jobs, I was in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. And then after that, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, made that major pivot in my life and got into law enforcement, which is pretty late to be getting into that line of work. But after law enforcement, I started a school security consulting business, and I coached girls high school basketball. And that's when the cancer developed. Actually, when I was a coach, I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, and initially didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But when it wouldn't heal, I ended up going to a doctor, and that started this odyssey through cancer.
Wow. So at that point then, was it there that you started this journey of reflection? And, I know that you've gone on to write a book. You've gone on to have a really inspirational career now as a speaker and teaching, kind of following that same theme of giving back and using it for good, which I love. So when you think about kind of the 4 truths, is that something that you reflected on? Because I can see them in your whole story. So is this something that came about in reflection, kind of post-diagnosis?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you've sort of got all these different experiences, different jobs and things like that I had. And how do you sort of put them together? What's the puzzle look like when they finally come together? And, I came up with the 4 truths, and you're going to laugh at this being a podcast. Though I was on a podcast that was called My 3 Truths. And I was like, boy, I better come up with my 3 truths. And I don't mean to say that was something I didn't reflect on, that I didn't think about, but it allowed me to sort of codify these truths. And I had 3, and then I was like, no, there's this one that's kind of nagging me, that, and we like things in 3s, we kind of like we were talking about, you like stories, you like things in 3s, but I added a 4th one just because I felt that legacy, and it's the legacy truth that I felt was so important. What do we leave behind? What are we leaving when we leave this planet to our families, our friends, our communities, and things like that? So I added that 4th truth. So it was just something that, one, I was on a podcast that forced me to start to think about this. And then again, I talk about meaning in your misery. What can I do to have meaning in between my cancer treatments, in between my surgeries? Can I speak? Can I do podcasts? And that's true. I mean, I started this speaking business, and then COVID hit. And a friend of mine reached out and said, hey, Terry, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? I said, sure. What's a podcast? I had no idea what a podcast was. And he explained it to me, and I said, okay, that sounds good. I think I'd like to do that. But Spencer, I provided no value. My first podcast, I was absolutely horrible. I had Post-it notes all around the camera. He'd ask me a question. I'd kind of lean in and read one of the, it was terrible. But then I thought back afterwards, and I thought, the first time I drove a car, I wasn't any good at it. I mean, the first time I cooked a meal, I think I burned the water. The first time I studied algebra, I was no good at it. Most of us aren't real good at something when we first started, but I liked it. I thought it was a good medium. So how can I get better? And I remember when I was talking to my publisher, and I said, Scott, I listened to every podcast I've been on. And he said, no, Terry, it's not about being good. It's just about not sucking. I said, well, thanks for the title of my next book. Just don't suck. But not really. It's not what it's called. But I was like, no, I want to be good at this. How many times do I say or huh, or use those filler words? Do I have a better story that tells that point? or can I condense the story that I'm using? Whatever it is, I want to get better at it. And now probably 700 podcasts that I've been on around the world, this is just an opportunity for me to give back to so many people that have helped me in my life.
That's inspirational. I appreciate that. And I want to give the audience actually your 4 truths, and maybe ask you a question about them. So for those who are not familiar, the 4 truths are: control your mind or it will control you, embrace pain and discomfort to build strength and resilience, leave a legacy through the impact you have on others, and as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. When you think about those 4 truths now, which one resonates most strongly with you today?
Absolutely the first one. When I first put them together, people were like, is one more important than the other? And I would say no, they're all equally important. But the more I read, the more I sort of researched, studied, even thought about my own experience, said, no, that first one, if you can't control your mind controls everything. How you're thinking, I go back to, and I'm old enough to remember Bruce Lee, the martial artist, who used to talk about, be very careful how you talk to yourself. And whether we admit it or not, we all talk to ourselves. I talk to myself all the time. Where I get into trouble is when I start answering myself. Then that becomes a problem. We talk to ourselves. And what are we saying? And, I use this example of basketball. If I took a basketball and went out on the court and started to practice free throws, if you could look at my brain under an MRI, there would be a certain area of my brain that would light up. If I thought about taking that basketball and going out on that court and shooting those free throws, that same area of my brain would engage. That same area of my brain would light up. So understanding that, be careful what you say to yourself. I mean, if you keep telling yourself, like I said, I'm terrible at algebra. Eventually you will wire your brain to the point where, yeah, you're right. You are terrible at algebra. We all become what we think.
That's powerful. And it's such an important concept. This, the power of your mind, the ability to control how you feel, what you become. One of my favorite quotes ever is Jim Rohn. And really he has 2, but that I think about from this that changed my life. The first one, I'm going to probably butcher, but it is essentially stand guard at the door of your mind. And his point was, what you let into your mind, both from your own thoughts as well as from external sources, is a massively important decision to make. It's something you have to be very conscientious of. And then the second one is that success in anything is not something you can chase after or achieve. It's something that's attracted to you by the person you become. And so I think about both those quotes because if you are standing guard at the door of your mind and you're careful about what comes into there, then just as you said, that will shape what you become. And then what you become will attract into your life the right things, the right people, the right experiences, everything that you wanted, that you are actually capable of because of what you did in terms of the work on your mind. And so I think for the audience, sometimes I can feel very almost esoteric, like, control your thoughts. But it's so much simpler than that, which is just to be conscientious, just to be thoughtful about your thoughts, to be thoughtful about how you talk to yourself is such a good way to put it, the way you phrase that how you're talking to yourself will become your reality. And so we all have those negative beliefs, those self-destructive beliefs, the patterns of what we say to ourselves, the reasons we give ourselves, and all those things. You can change them and then change how your brain is firing.
You can. And I remember reading a study from the Cleveland Clinic that said on any given day, a human has about 50 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through their minds, most of which we don't pay attention to. And I learned this early on. I learned this probably back when I was 15, 16 years old. I had some knee surgeries in high school, that there's a difference between thoughts, which are kind of arbitrary and just kind of filter through. They are what they are, and thinking. Thinking is where we get into trouble, where we start taking those thoughts and assigning feelings to them or situations to them. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know how you are, but I grew up in the 70s. If I hear like a Chicago song, it's like, it takes me right back to a dance with my girlfriend or something. I mean, it just moves me right back to just hearing a song. So if you take those thoughts and start thinking about them, thoughts, like I said, thoughts just filter through. They're not going to hurt you. They're not going to make it better. They're not going to do anything. But when you start thinking about them, how are you thinking about them? Are you thinking about them in a positive, good kind of way? Or are you thinking about them in a negative, trauma, horrible, this happened to me kind of way? We all have thoughts, but where we get into trouble is when we start thinking. And I like to do this exercise, and I'll offer this to your audience. If you're worried about something, if something's on your mind, you're concerned about something, take a piece of paper. And my dad taught me this. And write down everything that's bothering you, everything that's in your mind. Get everything down on a piece of paper. And then once you've got everything down, go through and cross out everything that you have no control over. And whatever is left on that piece of paper, that's what you can work on when it comes to whatever problem or situation you're talking about.
Yeah, that's such an important concept. I love that exercise, to be able to refocus on the things that you can control, and then, direct your thoughts in a useful way. Start thinking about solutions. Start thinking about the things that you have tangible influence over. That's such an empowering mindset, and it's such an empowering skill to use. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
When you think about kind of living these four truths, is there anything that you think people maybe misunderstands when they hear them? They're good sort of statements by themselves, but do you think that sometimes people might miss some of the nuances? There's something in there that you think people don't always catch?
I do. And I think probably that second truth about embracing pain and difficulty, it's kind of like, what do you mean? Embrace it. No, I want to get rid of it. I don't want pain. I don't want difficulty. I don't want anything bad happening in my life. But if you can use that pain, if you can take that pain and flip it inside of you, burn it as fuel, use it as energy to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. I mean, it kind of goes back to our mammalian brain. Our mammalian brain says, you know what? This hurts. This is uncomfortable. Stay away from it. And it's designed to keep you alive. That's all it is. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just designed to keep you alive. But I love there's a story, and it's a true story, happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University. There was a professor there who was doing an experiment with rats. As soon as I said, it's like, is going to talk about rats? Yes, I'm going to talk about rats. So just hang with me here. So he took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took those exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. First time, 15 minutes. It's not like you're going to flunk a test or your business is going to go under or your marriage is going to fail. You're going to die. And the second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. If we know we're doing the right things, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but if we're doing the right things, there's a very good chance, nothing's 100%, that you're going to get to where you want to be. And the second thing it's taught me, and I'm a living example of this, is that we all have a breaking point. But that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever give ourselves credit for. We stop, we quit, we give up, we give in long before our bodies are ready to shut down because our brain tells us this hurts, this is uncomfortable, we don't like it. And we know through research, if you just look at marathon runners talk about hitting that wall. There's a point in the race where, I think I'm spent. I don't think I've got any more fuel on board. I don't think I can go on. But they find that if they keep pushing forward, if they keep moving forward, eventually they break through that wall and they get that sort of second wind that allows them to finish the race. That same thing applies to any adversity that we're having in our lives.
That's an incredible story. Yeah, I've never heard that research that you shared. That's so interesting. And I think it's something that everyone can apply. It's something that you can apply right now in terms of being able to look at your thoughts and go, where am I quitting on myself? Where am I Where am I giving up when I'm really not at the limit, but I've maybe allowed myself to start to believe that I am. I've started to talk to myself that way. I can't take it anymore. That's all I can do. That's the best. There's just nothing else. And if we can just change those, it makes me very reflective. It just as I'm listening to, man, where have I put that ceiling on myself? Where am I at 15 minutes and I could be at 60 hours? It just makes me very reflective to think about that, because I'm sure I'm doing it. I'm sure we all do it in some areas at times.
We do. And, and let me offer this. This is something I do every day. And I think that anybody who's listening to us can do this. Every day of your life, do at least one thing that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to handle those things when they present themselves.
Yeah, I remember I read the book Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, and he talks about that principle. And it's such a true principle. And there's been research now that substantiate that it changes your brain and it changes your capacity. And so the ability to embrace the suck, I think you said earlier, and just lean into the pain is such an valuable skill. One of the things I've been doing for a couple of years now is I go cold plunge near my house every morning. And so when family visits, I'm like, hey, come with me, and so we go and we hop in. And one of the common themes of people that I've taken is that often they'll say, oh, well, like, I'm sure you're used to it by now. And I say, well, what's interesting is it still sucks every time I get in. It's not any easier to get in today than it was a year or some odd ago. What is different is that a couple of years ago, when I would first get in the water, it would take me 45 seconds to just get the panic down and stop breathing so fast and really being all amped up and being tight and being like, oh my gosh, this is so freezing. When I first started, it was like, that was a long period where you get in, you almost want to just jump out immediately, but you get through that and then your breathing's going fast and you get that down. And then at some point you realize, like, okay, this is still uncomfortable, but I could probably stay in here for a while. And so I tell most people, it's like, the phases are, don't resist the urge to jump out, then work on your breathing and calm it down. And once that's done, you're going to realize you could be in there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, fine. Because yeah, it's cold, but I mean, that's it. It's just cold. It's not even that big of a deal. Your body finally realizes this is only 45, 50 degree water. I'm not advocating doing 15 minutes in, 30 degree water, hypothermic. But it's one of these things where now I can get in, go under, come up, feel all that same panic, and it will go away in 2 breaths. And then I'm like, okay, I can be in here for a long time. And so how fast my brain can just decide, oh, this is going to suck and I'm okay with it. That's the part that has changed, but it's still freezing cold. There's not a day I'm going to get in and go, this just feels warm now. 40 degrees is nice and comfortable. 45, 50, it's all very warm and comfy. And so but we tell ourselves that because we want to sort of opt out. It's easy if, oh, well, you've done it a lot of times, so it must be easy for you now. That makes it sort of gives us permission to quit. So I thought of that when you were sharing this, because that's the suck that's one of the little things in my life that I'm doing constantly. But if you don't find those things and embrace it, I love to use the word embrace, not just do it. I mean, doing it is a good start, but if you could embrace it and just accept it, it'll change your whole mindset.
It will. And I, being in a wheelchair and not having legs, so I do the same thing, but I just do it in the shower. I turn the water as cold as it can, and I let, and it helps me, like you say, you embrace the suck. But then when I go to treatment and I take this medicine that, I have the terribly violent reaction, I shake, I throw up, I do all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm used to the suck. I mean, I do it at the hospital. I do it when I'm in the shower. Whenever it is, I'm tired. I don't really want to work out today. I don't want to, go work out. It's those little things. It doesn't have to be, something huge. I'm going to go run a marathon. No, you don't have to. I mean, if you want to, fine, but it doesn't have to be those things. And you're right. I'm the same way. It's like, okay, I got the one. All right, here's the shower. Here it comes. And you want to like, oh, to hell with this. I just want to get out. No, calm down, relax. It's same thing. I know exactly how you're feeling. I can picture you, how you're controlling your breathing. And I don't know about you. You seem like a much tougher guy than I am, but I figure, you know what? If a kind of wuss like me can do it, anybody who's listening to us can do it.
I don't know about that. I think you've endured a lot more than I have, my friend. But that being said, one of my favorite quotes is from Tony Robbins. He said, one time I heard him say, I don't negotiate with myself. And I thought, that's a great way to put it. We will waste so much energy negotiating with like, oh, do I do it? Do I not do it? Oh, it's going to hurt. Oh, it's not, I don't really like that. It's going to be uncomfortable. And all that mental energy is just a total waste. You just say yes, you turn the cold on, you know it's going to suck. And then once you're through it, you're like, oh, wow, I'm proud of myself that I did that. And I feel more confident and actually kind of feel good now that the cold's gone. The contrast means that normal air temperature feels warm and my body's heating up. And I mean, it's just a whole different experience. You get all the benefits on the other side of the pain. And so anyways, the other thing that I wanted to talk about on this subject that you mentioned earlier is this idea of, when we think about the truths and this pain, you said something to the effect, I can't quote it perfectly, but what I got from it was another quote where I heard someone say, the only problem we have is believing we shouldn't have problems. And so you were talking about kind of wrestling with like, oh, I shouldn't have this. It shouldn't be this way, as opposed to just embracing it. That's another thing that I think about in this is if you believe something different, you feel different about it. If you believe you're not supposed to have problems, then when the big things hit you, yeah, it's going to hurt like hell because you didn't think it was supposed to happen. If you know, hey, people are going to die around me. Stuff's going to go wrong. I could have a terminal disease tomorrow. Who knows? So I know that's a possibility. I'm not pretending like, no, my life's going to go perfect. I'm not going to have car accidents. I'm not going to have sickness. I'm not going to have pain. I'm not going to have, no. Those barriers you put up to try to protect yourself become the prison that destroys you. And you live a much lower quality life. And so, so I was thinking of that when you're talking. How for you have you seen more freedom in choosing to embrace it, in choosing to not put those barriers up, not imprison yourself? What are some of the maybe tangible examples in the last 10 years where you go, wow, that I wasn't even supposed to be alive, and I had this experience that's been a peak moment for me, something that I'll treasure forever?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is going to kind of sound like a goofy story, but when I found out I had tumors in my lungs and I had my leg amputated, I actually went with my wife to the mortuary, into the cemetery, into the church, and I planned my funeral. And because I go on podcasts like yours and I speak to groups in person about motivation and mindset and the need to keep moving forward, I actually got some brushback from people who were like, oh, don't you think planning your funeral's kind of defeatist? And I was like, well, the last time I checked, I think we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. I mean, every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is truly going to live. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. So this whole thing about death, we don't like to talk about death in the West. It's uncomfortable. It's never going to happen to me, or it's going to happen way down. I think death is one of those things that we need to talk about. I kind of look at death like it's sort of always in my peripheral vision. It's always out here. I'm not focused on it. I'm not, it doesn't take over my life, but it's something I think about every single day. And I love this. The stoic philosophers used to talk about the Latin phrase memento mori. In other words, remember death, not for the sake of dying, but for the sake of living. of what are you going to do? We're all going to die. Like you said, we might die in a car accident tomorrow. We might get a terminal disease. Are we going to wait? Are you going to wait and put off doing whatever it is you want to do? I heard one time that the richest real estate in the world are cemeteries because they're areas rich in books never written, relationships never pursued, businesses never started. When it's your turn to be buried, when it's your turn to be in the cemetery, don't have those regrets. Do stuff now. Get out there and do it. And let me end with this. A lot of times in life, and I know I've done this, Spencer, you may have done it as well. We kind of put up these arbitrary mileposts. So we say by the time I'm 28, I want to be making $100,000 a year. Or by the time I'm 32, I want to be married and have a kid. And when those things don't happen, we tend to, I'm a failure. I haven't been able to do what I thought I was supposed to do. There's a guy by the name of Jeff Wetzler, and he talks about looking at our lives differently. He talks about looking at life in decades. So he says in your 20s, do everything, anything at all that interests you, that you think you might enjoy, you think you might have interest in, do it. Make mistakes, screw up, do all kinds of things in your 20s. And then in your 30s, find those maybe 3 or 4 things that really matter to you. And then in your 40s, find that one thing. You're older, you're more mature, you've got more life experience, your prefrontal cortex has come together, and dig into that one thing. And he said, then in your 50s and 60s and beyond, you will reap the rewards of how you lived your life because you're not using arbitrary mileposts. You're using an entire decade to do something that you enjoy with your life.
Well, that's sage advice. Before we wrap up, I'd like to ask just 2 quick questions. One fun one, as a basketball fan myself of the tormented Sacramento Kings. What is your favorite basketball team?
The Chicago Bulls.
I mean, that's a timeless classic. I assumed growing up in Chicago, home of the greatest player to ever play, that would be maybe an answer, but I was curious.
You had to do that. But there's kind of 2 quick reasons I'll say. I played against Michael Jordan when he was a freshman at North Carolina. So it was my senior year in college. He was his freshman year. It was 1982. North Carolina would go on to win the national championship. And the funny thing is, the following night we played against North Carolina State and Jim Valvano, who the following year, 1983, they would go on to win the national championship. So in one weekend, without even knowing it, we played against 2 national championship teams. But fast forward like 20 years, my youngest brother is coaching Michael Jordan's 2 sons in high school. And he said, one day I'm at practice, and he said, I'm teaching the kids a drill, and I look up, and nobody's paying attention to me. So I look where the kids are looking, and it's over at the door. And Jordan had come into the gym as a dad to pick up his kids after practice. And my brother looked at him and said, hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind waiting out in the hall until practice is over? And Jordan and his wife were incredibly gracious. They were like, sure, coach, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'll wait outside till practice is over. My brother thought later, geez, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice. So
that's a great story. Yeah. That's I can't imagine that trying to teach the kids of an all-time great.
Exactly.
Pressure in that situation. And then the second question I wanted to ask is, if you had to leave with one message, we've covered so many great things, but if there's one thing that you wanted the audience to know, feel, or understand as we part, what would you leave us with?
I'm going to tell you another story. So when I was growing up, I was a big fan of Westerns. My mom and dad used to let me stay up and watch Gunsmoke and Bonanza, and my favorite was Wild Wild West. 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You probably have seen it. It's a huge blockbuster. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were 2 living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not just made-up characters for the movie. And if you look at Doc Holliday, he was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much he was a gunslinger and a card sharp. And Wyatt Earp had been some form of a lawman almost his entire life. And somehow these 2 men from entirely opposite backgrounds come together and form this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. The real Doc Holliday died at that sanitarium, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt at this point in his life is destitute. He has no money, he has no job, he has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc. And it's almost his last scene in the movie, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was younger, but she joined a convent over the affair. But she's all that I ever wanted. And then he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal. There's just life. And get on with living yours. Spencer, you and I probably know people. There's probably people out there listening to us that are like, you know what? When this happens, I'll have a successful life. Or when that occurs, I'll have a significant life. Or when this occurs, I'll have a happy life. What I'd like to leave your audience with is this. Don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you were put on this earth, use your unique gifts and talents, and live that reason. Because if you do, at the end of your life, I'm going to promise you two things. Number one, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
Thank you, Terry. For the audience, if you'd like to get in touch with Terry or you would like to learn more of his incredible wisdom that he shared with us here today, you can buy his book, Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And so that's obviously a great way to support the great work he's doing and obviously to serve yourself and learn more about what we've talked about today. If you want to get in touch with him, you can go to his website, motivationalcheck.com. And of course, he's available to speak, podcasts, etc. So thank you so much, Terry. We wish you nothing but success. And I look forward to hopefully having you back on maybe 10 more years from now after you've accomplished even more greatness.
Well, Spencer, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Hey, before you go, I have a small request. Our mission is to empower as many people as possible to maximize their potential through the power of leverage. Could you help us in this mission by leaving a review on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube? And if you know just one person who would benefit from today's episode, would you please share it with them? Your support means the world to us, and we are thrilled to have you in the community. Thank you for being a part of our journey and helping us grow. You can find show notes for today's show and past shows at lessonsinleverage.com, which also has links to connect with me personally and connect with our various podcast channels across your favorite social networks. A big thanks to Solve.cloud, who sponsored this episode. They're a group of expert consultants that help SaaS and financial services companies to implement, optimize, and manage Salesforce.com. They can help you with custom integration solutions and are helping customers to implement some of the most important generative AI technologies. You can find them at solved.cloud. That's SOLVD.cloud is the URL. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.